Awesome, man. Jim Cavale, sitting here with Jim Cavale today. He is a serial entrepreneur. I would categorize you as, Jim. You've done a lot of things in your life. Former college athlete, former college baseball player at Montevello down in Alabama. So just wanted to say thanks for coming on, man. I'm excited to hear your story.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. I appreciate you having me and excited for the conversation.
Sure. So I wanted to first maybe just hear a little bit of the personal background, but then obviously get into the entrepreneurial journey and now what you're doing at athletes.org. But to start, I was digging through, there's a TED talk that you did 10 years ago. What was the origin of that? Like, how did that come about? And if you could just share a little bit of the message in that, man, it's awesome. Inspirational.
Yeah, so TEDx does TED events really in cities all around the world. And here in Birmingham, Alabama, they put an event together for the first time, I think in 2012, maybe even 2011. And it evolved as time went on. And in 2013, they did it up on the campus of UAB. And they approached me about speaking. My mom had just passed a year before. So I did the talk, I think, in 2013. And my mom had passed when I was 30 years old, not to date myself, but I'm 42 now. So 12 years ago, she passed when I was 30. And that had a big impact on me. My mom had a big impact on me. And it inspired me to give a talk that was really all about leaving a legacy and a formula, if you will, to be able to leave a legacy. And it was all based on how my mom lived her life and how I felt she was leaving a legacy for me to leave to my children and so on. And so it was really cool to be a part of that event. I've always been a speaker in every business I've built, and speaking something I enjoy doing. It's one of the things that, I am wired to do. And so it was really fun to do it outside of business on a topic that I'm really passionate about.
Absolutely. I love it. Yeah, the message was awesome. I think you ended up with a quote. It was like, begin with the end in mind, right? And I'm sure that's probably something that you keep in mind every day with just building the company. But so you played baseball at Montevello down in Alabama. I actually have a friend, a buddy from Seton Hall, whose sister I think played lacrosse there recently. So that's why I had heard of it. But were you on that path to entrepreneurship out of school?
Not really. I think,
No.
for me, I grew up in Syracuse, New York. Always loved playing baseball, always wanted to play college baseball in the South. Played basketball and baseball through high school at Christian Brothers Academy. And most of my offers were to go to Northeast schools. And I really wanted to get out of the weather, to be honest. Baseball's tough in the Northeast. You know that going to Seton Hall. And so there was a school in Alabama, a D2 school, that had offered me a scholarship. And it was a chance to take a risk, go 1,000 miles from home, experience culture shock, but also see a part of the country I never would have seen, and chase my dream on the diamond. And so I did it. And first off, that taught me really what it's like to take a risk, because that was a big risk for me to do that. Could have stayed in my comfort zone, stayed in the Northeast, stayed around people that I knew. Instead, I went 1,000 miles away and knew nobody in a place that seemed like a different country to me at the time. And so at Montevello, played baseball, but also really found through my major, broadcast journalism, my passion to create. And I thought, being a broadcast journalism major, that my gift to communicate would lead to me being a broadcaster, on air talent, and I would chase down that career whenever baseball was done. But what ended up happening was I built a broadcast network for my university. There was no TV radio network at the school. They had all the equipment. They had a lot of the infrastructure I needed. I just had to build a network with student workers around a vision that I came up with for us to all rally around, raise money, learn how to do the other things off camera, like edit, produce, etc. And building that and running it for a couple of years made me realize, man, I really like this broadcast journalism thing and this media thing, but what I really enjoy? I really enjoy building stuff, and I enjoyed being a founder of this. And maybe this is what I'm meant to do. And so when I got done with college, started my first company right away, NextSpex. And, back then, '05, high school athletes were getting recruited by mailing out their DVDs and VHS tapes to college coaches. And we use this thing called the internet and this new thing called video streaming to help athletes do that all digitally. And, we sold high school to high school, and it was free for the athletes at those high schools to use our software, and built a great database of college coaches and got thousands of athletes scholarship money, millions of dollars in scholarship money over 5 years of building the business, and really built it in southeastern states. So Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia. And we ended up getting acquired in 2010. And we were really early in the video streaming recruiting movement. Huddle really won that movement. But being able to build something, have an exit in my first 5 years, honestly, was more valuable than going and getting an MBA, because it was like on the job, learning how to raise money, create a vision, create a strategic plan to fuel the vision, hire a team, build things that I didn't know how to build myself, like technology, by leading other people. And it really affirmed my hunch that entrepreneurship and building a business and being a creator was what I really was wired and meant to do.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. How did you think about putting a team around you together? I mean, obviously you said you always like talking. I'm sure maybe you're like a natural born salesman type, right? But how did you approach putting a team together and just building that network?
Yeah, I think, I didn't know what I was doing, first of all. And, it was more of finding people that were also passionate about the problem we were going to solve at NextSpex, and getting them to be involved in different roles. But as far as like things I later learned in businesses after that, what I've learned to date is, if you're going to build a team, you got to define what the seats on the bus are. And those are the roles you create. And those roles should have specific measurables that show if the person's successful or not. So he or she knows if they're successful in their role, because people want to be measured. They want to know if they're successful. But also, that role needs measurables so that you know what to hold that role accountable to. And hiring to a role and getting the right person in the right seat on the bus is hard, because a lot of people just use resume to make decisions on who's on their team. Resume is really not enough. Some people might have some things on their resume that would imply they'd be good in a role you're hiring, but they've never actually done the role you're hiring. So understanding what the wiring requirements are of that role, and understanding what their character and their values alignment is with the business you're building, are two things outside of resume that I think are really important. You look at sports in the NFL, there's some great college players that try to go in the NFL and they don't make it. And the reason why is they aren't a fit from a wire. They have the resume. They have a great resume. They were great college football players, but their skills don't necessarily translate to the NFL, because maybe it's their speed isn't the same. Maybe it's their size. Maybe it's their mental approach. There's a lot of different things. And where do they measure that before you go to the NFL? The combine. And the combine's there to say, hey, your resume got you to the combine, but here at the combine, we're going to see how you're wired and see if you're a fit for the role we're hiring for in the NFL. I think building a team is the same thing. And so defining the seats on your team, the roles, having measurables that are specific for that role that equate either success or failure in that role. And then not just hiring by resume, but hiring by wiring and character. Do the core values of the person you're hiring align with the core values of your company? I think that's really important.
That's such a good point. Yeah, because you can be on the bus and in the wrong seat, and that can totally you're not going to progress, man. And especially with a startup, I mean, it's a different story. I feel like in a big corporation, you can maybe just sit around and get away with it, but in a startup, you're trying to achieve something and get somewhere. So, yeah, it's an interesting point. There was NextSpex, and then you've had a few other exits, Iron Tribe, Influencer. I guess what's made you have an exit? I'm sure that there was a decent, just monetary value attached to that. What made you want to keep going to these other businesses and keep going down that entrepreneurial path?
Yeah, well, with NextSpex, honestly, I felt like it was a failure. And the reason I felt like it was a failure is even looking back at it now and seeing there still is not a de facto way to today, 2024, 19 years after I started that company, to get recruited digitally. It's so fragmented. And so I felt like we could have built something better. I felt like I made a lot of mistakes in that business. One of the biggest mistakes I made was we had recurring revenue from high schools for their athletes to use our software. We gave that up and made it free for high schools. And we went to an advertising revenue model. It was a horrible decision. And there's other bad decisions I could tell you about, even like the fact that I said I didn't know what I was doing with hiring people. And so I wanted to build off of the fact that I at least had built a company, that I had had an exit. And while it wasn't as big and successful as I thought it could be, and I felt like there were some things I really failed at, I felt like building a new business and avenging those losses by learning from those failures was a huge opportunity for me as an entrepreneur. I also felt like I had to do it with a partner this time. In business too, I partnered up with a guy in the fitness industry to build a fitness business together. And he had been in the industry for a decade before we worked together and started Iron Tribe and scaled it. Matter of fact, he started Iron Tribe, and it was one gym, and I was just a member of the gym who was going through an exit with NextSpex. But post exit, I went to him with, "Hey, what about opening a second one and scaling this?" And so we partnered up on the second location, the third location, the fourth location, and then we partnered up and co-founded the franchising company to take it to the really southeast. And he had been in fitness for a decade. He was, older than me, and he had roles in his life that I wanted. He was a great husband. He was a great father. He was a guy who really wore his faith on his sleeve and even wove it into how he did business. And those were things I wanted. And so the second business, was great because we built a business with recurring revenue. And I learned from my mistake in the first company by really applying that principle and creating recurring revenue streams with clients at all of our markets that we opened Iron Tribe gyms in. But I also learned the things that I just said in and out of the business from him. And he probably would say he learned some things from me. And we had a really great partnership where we complemented each other. Even our gifts were different, and we worked really well together. And so with that business, after 6 years and 47 gyms, I was in a place where I had new ideas and I wanted to get back into sports. And fitness is similar to sports. It's kind of adjacent as an industry to sports, but it's not sports. I want to get back into sports. I wanted to get really into college. Felt like a lot was going on with the Ed O'Bannon case being decided in 2014 and him beating the NCAA in court, which I felt was the writing on the wall for NIL to happen at some point. Felt like there was an opportunity to build something in college. And so 2016, I went to a guy that I just told you I admire greatly and very close with and work really well with. And I felt like I was ready to go back off on my own again. And he bought me out. And it was bittersweet because I loved working with him, but it was a good deal for me and my family. And it gave me the margin to explore the beginnings of what became Influencer. And when we launched Influencer in 2017, and I say we, I founded it on my own, but I ended up bringing in a co-founder who built all the technology because we ultimately realized there was a business to build helping college athletic programs with their athletes' social media. Back then, 2017, athletes were building brands, whether they knew it or not, on their Instagram, their Twitter, their Facebook. And, they didn't really know what to do because nobody was really equipping them with what to do. They heard everything not to do, don't tweet this, don't like
Yeah.
this. But they didn't really know what to do. And so we built Influencer as an app to provide content of themselves playing, practicing, working out, because it was already being shot by the school and their photographers and videographers. It was being shot by the media. The athletes just needed access to it. And so we
Hmm.
built a content delivery app that every athlete at every school that signed on and paid us for our software, those athletes all got that app and could automatically, using facial recognition, have every picture and video of themselves as it's shot in real time. And then they could share it to Instagram, share it to Twitter, share it to Facebook, and tell the story of their college athletics experience on social with the brand of their school kind of as a partner, because that content was being shot by the school. And, in 2017 to 2019, we really grew fast, and we had a lot of big schools sign on. John Calipari, Kentucky basketball, was our first client. That really helped. But we grew fast. And by 2019, we had over 100 schools. We had over 1,000 teams. We had over 20,000 athletes a day using our app. We had helped them reach over 10 million people on social media in the first year of the business with the content. And NIL by 2019 was definitely going to happen. Legislation had been passed in California that was kind of the writing on the wall that it was inevitable. And so Teamworks came to me, and they were already a very established tech company in the college and pro sports space. And their technology helped teams, college and pro, communicate with their athletes on everything they have to communicate about on a daily basis, instead of doing it through text or email. But also their app helped athletes manage their schedule, manage compliance, nutrition, like a lot of parts of their experience. And they came to us and said, listen, we have a vision to build the G Suite for college and pro teams. We want all the best apps that the athletes use as part of their experience as a college or pro athlete to be in our suite. And we want Influencer to be our first acquisition, but we plan to acquire another 10 companies like you and build a suite of apps that touch every part of the college or pro athlete experience. Do you want to do this deal? Because if we do it, we also want you to stay on board as CEO, and we want you to build for NIL because we know it's coming and we can put capital behind it. So I did the deal. Everybody said I couldn't do it. And the reason they said I couldn't do it, my wife, my dad, whoever is giving me advice at that time in 2019, saying, Jim, you're kind of unemployable. Like, how are you going to live inside of the Teamworks environment when, like, you're a founder and you like to run and have autonomy? And I felt like, it was a really great financial deal for my family and I. And I was at the time 37, so I was older. I had 3 kids. Felt like it was good to take some chips off the table. Number 2, they were giving me great stock options in a company I felt was going to be huge in pro and college sports, and already was pretty big. Number 3, their founder and me got along really well, and I trusted that he was going to let me run and still be the founder and entrepreneur and creator that I am. And he wanted me to be that because NIL had to be figured out, and they already had all the colleges. We had to build for NIL. This is the guy to do it. That's how he looked at me. And so I did the deal, and we built for NIL. And in 2021, we rolled out payments and reporting technology for all of our existing college clients to add to their deal with Influencer. And they did, because they needed a system of record for their athletes to report all their deals to, whether it's a deal from a collective, a deal from a brand. And so we became really the system of record for NIL for the majority of college athletics. And it was a wild ride, So, each company, I learned things. I'll say in Iron Tribe, biggest mistake we made was we tried to be all things to all people with our marketing. We were great marketers. We wrote a book about marketing and how we built the brand off of marketing. But when I really look at it, we used to laugh in Orange Theory. We used to say, who is going to go in a gym and do a group fitness workout on treadmills? But here's the thing. We laughed at them because we weren't their client, but they knew who their client was. And it was men and women, mostly women, who love to do cardio and sweat a lot in a club-like environment that brings them back to their younger years, and gamified through technology. Like, there's a whole group of people that like that. And they created that and found that market and focused on it and didn't care about me not liking what they do because I wasn't their client, and they crushed it. Whereas Iron Tribe, we were for everybody, old, young, athletic or out of shape. And we didn't have a focus. And so while we grew fast and we had a lot of success, I think we would have had 500 gyms instead of 50 if we had more focus with our marketing. And so with Influencer, we really focused on who our avatar was as a client. And we said no to pro sports teams. We said no to, politics organizations. We had a lot of political organizations say, what you do could help us with campaigns. We had a lot of people come. We said, we're focused on college sports. We're going to be the winner in college sports. And so each business I've made a ton of mistakes that I've been able to try to avenge in the next business.
You're a good storyteller, man. You just did the weave. Just weaved all that right back in. That was really cool. There's like so many things you just mentioned in that I wanted to just touch on, because I was a senior at Seton Hall in 2017, and we joke these days. I'm like, yeah, if I played in college baseball these days, maybe I would make like $17 or something like that off my
maybe
Seton
you just have a full ride, right? I mean, next year baseball is going to have 30. They can't have 35 scholarships.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but so I think about the guys with Influencer from that time period. It was like I think it was Isaiah Whitehead. There's like Angel Delgado, right? Some of these guys, I don't even know if they were using anything like this, but they just had these brands and they made a run in the Big East tournament. It's crazy how they probably even missed the wave, at least I think. But yeah. So, and then there's
it just happened under the table, right?
Right. So you're the expert. Right.
Well, that's really what NIL stands for.
And they got that team together. Yeah.
NIL stands for, you see, the name of my podcast is Now It's Legal.
Yeah.
And it's called Now It's Legal because NIL really stands for that. The reality is college athletes have been getting paid for a long time. Just talk to coaches. But they've been getting paid under the table. And NIL has allowed it to happen out in the open. And, there's a lot of athletes that actually, while it's great they're being paid, they're being taken advantage of with fake offers and all kinds of other stuff. And we can get into that. But it is interesting to think about who missed it. Like you just said, Delgado is an example. Johnny Manziel is a really well-known. I mean, imagine what Johnny Manziel probably would have stayed another year at least at Texas A&M. So
sure,
that's a real thing.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. Yeah. So you and then before we get into, because I want to hear the whole athletes.org story and how you started with, like, you're talking about business partners. I know Brandon Copeland, who's a 10-year NFL vet, I believe, but just like getting in front of some of these trends, what do you attribute that to? I mean, is that surrounding yourself with people, or is that just you think, like, having that instinct? What are your thoughts there?
I'm always thinking about what's next. And sometimes I'm thinking about it outside of my industry, or in my industry, but in other niches. And then, the next thing is, okay, I'm thinking about what's next, but like, how do you execute on it? Right? Because like ideas are meaningless without execution. I mean, I am an idea guy. I can come up with a lot of good ideas, but the magic is in like, how are we going to pull this thing off? And, with athletes.org, I was naturally shown the problem because in 2022, a year into NIL, I had, access to hundreds of millions of dollars of NIL data inside of our software at Influencer. I could see what was happening. And I would get asked by ADs and commissioners what's happening. And I would tell them all the same thing, whether I was speaking to them in a group in Washington, D.C., or whether I was talking to them on the phone. And it was like, hey, like, here's what's happening. 90% of your money is, and your players' NIL deal money is like coming from donors, and they're laundering money through a collective. And they're basically paying your players to play at your school. And I know you don't like those words in the same sentence, pay and play, but like that's what NIL is being used for. And as you know, it's a very unstructured environment. There's a lot of cheating going on. And there's also a lot of lying and taking advantage of athletes going on. And the reason it's so unstructured is because you got beat by O'Bannon almost 10 years ago in court, and you haven't done anything to get in front of it and structure it with rules. And it's also unstructured because you don't have an agreement, a partnership with your athletes at scale, kind of like the pros do with a collective bargaining agreement, which would prevent new lawsuits from coming. And there's new ones coming. Back then in 2022, that's where Hubbard versus the NCAA, Johnson versus the NCAA, Carter versus the NCAA, House versus the NCAA, all became court cases that, like O'Bannon, were going to disrupt college sports. Now, those cases were all about the schools not sharing revenue directly with the athletes who produce it. Because the schools have, built a really commercial business in college sports. 2022 was a $17.5 billion business. 2023 got bigger. And, after we get done with this year, it'd probably be close to 20 billion. And, the players get the same thing they got in 1983, a scholarship. And so the pie's gotten bigger, but the allocation to the athletes and percentage has gotten smaller. And so I would challenge these leaders on what are you going to do to get in front of these court cases and structure a way for not your donors through NIL, but you directly pay your athletes. And I could see that wasn't even on their radar. It wasn't even something that they would consider. Some of them would say, I'll never do that. If that happens, we got to pay athletes directly, I'll retire, right? And some of them have retired.
That's what's happening, right? Yeah.
So I got to a point where I was like, the only sustainable future for college athletics, the only way you address frustrations fans have with the transfer portal, the only way you address uniform NIL rules instead of states all having their own rules, the only way you address transparency that's needed to know what athletes are getting paid so there's actually a competitive landscape from school to school. The only way to do all those things is you have to let the athletes bargain, or as non-employees, negotiate with their schools. And that was the genesis of athletes.org. Cope and I, you mentioned Brandon Copeland, I call him Cope. Cope and I linked up at the Super Bowl a few years ago. He was contemplating playing an 11th season in the NFL. I was trying to sell him on being partners with me and building athletes.org as the Players Association for college athletes. He ended up deciding to not play an 11th year and partner with me. And honestly, if he didn't do that, I don't know if I would have started it. I felt like I needed a strong partner who had experienced a union in the pro ranks. Cope played 10 years. He was a union rep for his teams in the NFL, 3 of his 10 seasons. So he really understood what we were trying to bring to college sports. And, athletes.org isn't a union. College athletes aren't employees, but we're built to do a lot of what a union does, not just for the athletes to get them to the table and get them to be able to negotiate for themselves, but also for the schools. They need an athletes.org to do an agreement with them so they don't keep getting sued. So there's actually a sustainable future for college athletics that does have structure to the transfer portal and NIL and revenue sharing and all those other things, health and safety benefits. So, that was the genesis of it. And it's been a wild, 14, 15 months since we launched late last summer, because I went from being the CEO of a company that most of the schools work with, and I was business partners basically with the schools and the ADs. They were my client, right? I went from that to representing the athletes, which some of them look at is threatening, and others see the vision clearly and support what I'm doing. And so this has been a venture unlike anything I've done before, because it's polarizing and political, but it's part of the disruption that's going on in college athletics, and I believe it's the only solution.
And I've heard you mention that on a few other podcasts you were on, maybe even yours too, that there's people that you were on the same side of the table with that at one point that aren't taking your calls these days, or they've kind of turned the cold shoulder on you.
Yep.
Is that so? What's the main pushback then? That is are you a threat to NCAA athletics? Is that
no? Their threat is that they don't have structure, and it's chaos, and it's not a level playing field, and that there's more lawsuits coming. That's their threat. I shouldn't be looked at as a threat. They created that situation by not doing anything. And anyone who's a leader in college athletics that can't look in the mirror and say, I'm part of the problem, has a serious humility and self-awareness issue. They've created the problem. I didn't create it. I'm here to solve it for them and their athletes. And that's why we built this. And the reality is, you can't win without talent. You can't win without the athletes. You can't even have a program without them. And they should be partners with the school on how this all works. And until they are, it'll continue. Athletes will become employees. Schools say they never want that to happen. It will if they don't do anything. Athletes will sue for all kinds of things. Title IX issues on how money's being distributed. Eligibility. you'll have an athlete, I think, eventually say, how come we only play 4 years? I should be able to play 7 years. Like everything you can think of will become a lawsuit. I'm not creating those lawsuits. I've never gone to court with an athlete and started a case. There's people in our industry who've done that. I've never done that. I'm here to fix the problem. And the ones who see what I'm saying, he can look in the mirror and say, we have a problem. I'm part of the problem. They also can talk to me and say, Jim, how do you propose we fix the problem? The ones who can't,
Yeah. Yeah, man. Yeah. So, and listen, I know we've got about 5 minutes, so I just want to first say thanks for coming on, man. It's super interesting. I mean, I'm a huge college sports fan, hoops, football. It's crazy. It's an awesome year. I think the college football playoff is going to be interesting. But it's like, was that you that was kind of saying like nobody volunteered to have these extra games added to the schedule? It's kind of just happening.
There's another lawsuit.
Yeah,
They don't figure this out.
right.
A player that could go to the NFL,
yeah,
and make a bunch of money has to play in 2 extra playoff games and gets hurt, and there you go. So I mean, these are all real issues.
Yep. But so with athletes.org, you guys offer a I don't want to call it like a suite of, or it's almost like a package of a bunch of things. What else is it that you're offering? Like say you're the basketball player at Seton Hall and he's on athletes.org. What does he benefit from that?
And so there's 3 things we offer: support, voice, income. So on the support side, we have a benefits package that's free with your membership. You access it all through a member app. You can get help with contract review, accounting, doing your taxes, mental health. We can give you somebody to talk to if you need to talk to somebody. Second medical opinion. So we have all these pro bono partnerships with the top firms in the world in those categories and others that are all available to be booked for a consultation through the app, and it's free. The voice portion is really where we survey athletes on key issues and get their voice out there through the media. Eventually, we want voice to also be a place where we're fulfilling it by actually getting athletes to the table to negotiate with their school. And then income, we do group licensing deals for athletes. So any NIL deal with 5 or more athletes is a part of it. Is a group licensing deal. And so think of that as, video games, trading cards, merchandise, products. And so we bring deals to our athletes through group licensing. And of course, income down the line is we want to actually help these athletes negotiate their revenue sharing deal, which I mentioned earlier: the Hubbard case, the House case, the Johnson case, the Hubbard, or I forgot the other case. I think I might have named one twice, but I mentioned those cases. They've all been consolidated into a settlement that will allow schools to start sharing revenue up to $20.1 million per year starting next year. And I think about 70 schools are going to do it. You don't have to, but if you got the money and you want to pay athletes directly, you can start doing NIL deals. These aren't salaries, they're not employees, but you can do NIL deals with your athletes starting next summer. And it's a 10-year deal, and the cap goes up every year. There's escalators on it. So the cap starts at $20 million a school next year, but could be as high as $30 million plus per school in year 10. It's a 10-year deal. And so that settlement's significant because now schools are going to start sharing revenue with their athletes and having direct contracts with their athletes. The national letter of intent's gone. The schools are going to now have contracts with all their athletes, even if it's just a scholarship they're offering and there's no revenue sharing. And so you're talking about over $1 billion next year will be paid from schools to college athletes because about 70 schools will do this. And, helping them negotiate those deals and creating some standards as far as the standard contract or some of the other standards that need to be created that at the pro level are created by the NFLPA and the NFL: minimum salary, maximum salary, standard contract, free agency rules. Those things need to be brought down into college. So income is a place where we can offer more and more as things like this settlement happen. Voice is a place where we can offer more as well by helping athletes negotiate for themselves as the settlement happens. But support something we're already offering today to all of our athletes. And we got a few thousand athletes sign up. We have over 3,000 members. We're focused on basketball and football athletes that play at power conference schools, but we have athletes in all sports at all levels. That's just our focus because those athletes are the ones who are really the revenue generators that created this situation where now revenue sharing is going to occur.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, man. Absolutely. It's awesome. It's super interesting. Like I said, and then what about maybe just final question here for you, but at some point it ends, right? I mean, your college career is going to end. A lot of these people are going to have to go get a career, go get a job.
Yeah.
What's your thought around that? I mean, is there support for that during that process too? I'm curious.
Yeah. I mean, when you're an AO member, you're an AO member for life. We literally call it the locker room for life. And so I think the opportunities for us to create career avenues for athletes when they're done, the opportunities for former athletes to mentor current athletes and help the younger version of themselves, all that is part of what we're building.
Cool, man. Well, Jim, thanks again. I appreciate your
Yeah.
time. This is great what you guys are doing. I've been tuning into your podcast and just will continue following along and wish you guys luck. Where can people find you? I know you're on Instagram and everything, but
Yeah, I
give a
mean,
quick shout out.
Instagram, LinkedIn are the two main places on social where I play. But I'm on Twitter as well, and it's all just the same, Jim Cavale, JimCavale. And then the podcast now it's legal. Good one to subscribe to on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, YouTube, or you can follow the teaser videos from the podcast for each new episode on Instagram at Now It's Legal Pod.
Yes, sir. Season 2. He's on to season 2.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
I appreciate that, man.
Cool.
Thanks for having me.